What is up, everybody? Hello, beautiful people. Woo! We're almost down to the wire here. It's kind of coming up to the end of the year. We have two powerful live streams with two powerful people. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Ariel Sim. And I was doing a little research on her. My God, she's been busy. Look at what she's done in her life. Currently, she's working as the Director of Design Anthropology at Mars Solutions Lab. That's what she's doing right now. It's where she's calling us from. She's also in the past a senior consultant, manager at Dublin, manager at Monitor Deloitte, UX design research fellow at iHub Nairobi. Wow. She's been around, guys. Lead research and development specialist at Siricom, research technician at Bureau of Applied Research in Anthropology. She got her Master's of Global Affairs from the University of Toronto and her undergrad degree from the University of Arizona. She's spoken at TEDx Ottawa. Really cool talk called What If We Could Free Our Minds. Go check that out after this. She's also spoken about human-centered design user research. On today's show, we're going to be talking about future-proofing UX with none other than Ariel Sim. Welcome to the future!
Yeah, Ariel!
Hey guys.
How are you doing in chilly Toronto right now? How you holding up?
You know what? I am cold when I'm outside and warm when I'm here in the studio talking to you. So I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So
Thank you for doing this. Now, we have a mutual friend together, and she had just recommended, like, you got to talk to Ariel, and so here we are. Now, I know you've prepared a short presentation, maybe 15, 20 minutes. We'll get into that in just 1 second. If you guys are watching this live, be sure to comment on the comment section. I'll be reading it along with Jonah, my broadcasting partner today. So, Ariel, I'm going to turn the show over to you right now. Do your thing.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I need to give you a call out for your music. Hold on, I'm going to pull it up.
Okay.
This Instagram is amazing. When you posted this earlier this morning, I was getting out of bed and I was like, yeah, I'm ready to do this show today. I just needed
All
to
right.
shout out.
All right. Beautiful.
Not everyone knows how to curate great music.
That's
But,
some
thank
good
you so
energy.
much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked today a little bit about what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And, we kind of talked in circles when we first met each other because there were so many intersections of who we are and, the future of design and things that we could talk about with the community. And we landed on my favorite topic, which is future-proofing user experience. And it sounds like a mouthful and it sounds really exciting, but it's something that I think about every single day. Can people see my slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll cut to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my whole career started off as an anthropologist, and it's actually through anthropology that I became a designer, because back in the day when I was studying with groups in the border with Mexico and Arizona, we were making a lot of city level kind of interventions for folks who didn't have a place to live, right? And so we'd make homes, or we'd make, data collection centers for people living on the border. And we would always figure that people didn't actually use the thing the way we wanted them to use it. And that's how I got into design. But people are a little confused about what design anthropology is, and for good reason. So user experience, for all of you folks on the line who are UX designers or any other type of designer, we are really good at articulating how we can make small things better, right? So as a UX designer, I'm going to focus in on little pieces of my phone. I'm going to make that button just right. I'm going to, study the colors that you like and the cultural references that you like, so that I can make sure that any product or service is meeting you exactly where you are. And it's incrementally getting better and better and better for that small function that it's supposed to serve in your life. Design anthropology kind of takes a step back. And instead of focusing on the button or the screen or the colors or the cultural references, it looks at, what does that tool that we just made, how does it actually change us? What does it mean to us as human beings, as a society? And as a result, is it changing us for the better, or is it changing us for the worse? With that in mind, it makes the act of designing much more complicated a lot of the times, because instead of having a metric of just making people happy or getting more conversions on your website, or having more and more people buy your product every week, you have an additional layer of thinking about, what is the long-term impact of what I'm building, And do I still feel good about it? And as a result, should I kind of change how I approach my design process? So that's what design anthropologists do. We do design, and we also research design in this super meta way to see if what we're doing in design is a good thing. And if we think that it's good, we keep going. If we think that we might be on the wrong path, we try really hard to redirect for us to be either more ethical or better for people or better for the planet. So as a result, like, my life, every day I wake up, I am just obsessed with tools. That is what I do. I live and breathe tools every day. And sometimes a tool is, physical. It can be a wrench or a hammer or my comb for my hair or whatever. But tools are also these digital things that improve our lives, right? Like Google Maps is a tool. This microphone that I'm speaking into is a tool. And every single tool that we've ever built in the history of humankind was inspired by some type of need, right? The earliest tools were things like, hammers, rocks to break, little nuts open so that we could eat them. So they're inspired by a need, and we build them. But then that tool actually changes who we are. And because the tool changes who we are, it actually affects what we build next, which is kind of incredible to think about. So when we look at that, we have to kind of do this thing that we call zooming in and out. And zooming in and out means, like, you, Chris, like, what tool do you use the most in your life?
Probably Keynote.
Keynote? So I could be like, Chris Doe, I'm gonna design the best Keynote add-on in the world. So I go down to the bottom of that triangle, and I learn everything about you, Chris Doe.
Okay.
I learn about, what your favorite colors are. I learn about.
Are you Googling me right now? Who's typing that thing in? Who's doing that? Is that you, Jonah?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, Jonah. Okay, keep going.
So, I'll do as much user research as possible in order to understand exactly how I can improve your experience with Keynote. But we can also zoom up to the group version of that, right? So, like, how does that show up in the world? Well, Keynote is a presentation software, right?
Yeah.
There's millions and millions and millions of people trying to talk to each other in the world, And what enables people in the world to talk to each other or not? Well, our computers, but also our policies, where we live in the world, who we actually have access to, And so when we zoom up and understand your experience just with Keynote, situated in a whole landscape of, like, millions and millions of other humans who are trying to talk to each other, it can make us understand the opportunities differently, and then we can zoom back down. And so I get really excited about that type of activity, zooming in and out, because user experience designers, we don't get, asked to go up to the big picture very often. As a user experience designer, usually when you walk into a room, they say, great, we want you to make this look pretty, and we want it to sell,
Right.
And very rarely does that come with the caveat of, and also, can you let us know how you think that we can improve, the bigger picture of what we're trying to do here? Designers, when they walk into the room and they're able to say, I'm happy to make this work better for you, but it's not just making sure that this tool works, but making sure that how we're putting it in market and how we talk to people about how to use it, that's a super empowering thing. And it changes the arc of design, right? Like, I've walked into design rooms, and I've been, on a digital design team, and they want me to give them the user research feedback and insights just so that they can optimize, conversions and clicks for that week. And then we'll sit down and we'll have a conversation about whether or not we're actually doing a good thing, or whether or not we're actually achieving the human goal behind it. And it can completely change the direction of a product that we take. And so that's kind of my mission. My mission is to spread the gospel of encouraging designers to walk in with really strategic frames to bring into the people that are asking them to just kind of optimize for beauty and conversion. So what are some examples, right? So if it's not just the tools we have, but how we use them that matters, how can that look like in the world? Well, my favorite one is the first tool that humankind ever discovered, right? Which is
fire.
And fire has amazing things that we can do with it, right? Like, we can cook a meal, we can warm our homes, we can do amazing positive things with fire. But what's on the other side of fire? while we can burn down villages. This is from Game of Thrones, for any Game of Thrones fans out there. But so fire is this double-edged sword, right? There's really positive uses for fire, and there's really negative uses for fire too. We move thousands of years forward into modern day history, and we look at our smartphones, and we have the same thing. Our smartphones are these tools, but it's really how we use them that matters in terms of what value we're getting out of them for society. So, a positive version of a smartphone is that I get lost all the time, and my phone helps me get unlost, right? Like, I can find where I am in 5 seconds as long as I have access to internet or something, and I can improve my safety, right? Especially as a woman.
Right.
But on the other side, that same phone that's in my pocket all day, every day, I'm addicted to it, and I'm addicted to it. I'm scrolling, I'm going to it for validation. I'm on it way too much, it's reduced my attention span.
Right.
I'm just addicted to my phone. And I know that so many people are. Like, don't tell me you're not. And I appreciate you if you're not. You are a better person than I am. So even our most impressive inventions have these really double-edged swords. We see that, young kids are having problems with like social isolation, that the access that they have on social media is kind of this, it's great to get connected to the world, but at what cost, right?
Right.
And so this fascinates me. Like, how can we take these tools? We can't go away from this so much anymore, right? Like, we've chosen smartphone, and given that we've chosen smartphone, how do we make it a better version so that we're on this, helping people get found, doing good things for the world, and kind of avoiding the negative aspects of people getting isolated from their communities and stuff like that. Another thing I think about a lot is, like, we oftentimes build a tool not realizing where it could go. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that in their life as a designer, but a lot of the things that we create in consumer design are made for a certain purpose. So, like, social rating is one of my favorite ones. Social rating, when it was initially created, had all sorts of purposes, right? And especially for new services like Uber or things that are more based in the sharing economy, social rating was put into Uber in order to protect us, right? It was put into Uber so that we could actually make sure that whoever we were getting into that car with, we knew they weren't like a serial killer. You know what I mean? Because other people had vouched for them, right? And so those ratings in Uber had a really important purpose to play in the early part of the product, And there's even these things, how to maintain your Uber rating. Oh man, I remember once my Uber rating went down because I was just like grumpy for a few months. I wasn't very nice in cars. And so I remember I read this too. It said, don't try to fit extra people in the car. Don't get in the wrong car. Strike up a conversation. Be ready when the driver arrives. Don't eat in the car. I'm really bad at that. I have to stop eating in Ubers. But all of these things, are intended for us to kind of be accountable to ourselves and be accountable to the people on the other side, and to protect us, to keep us safe. And for people like me, it makes sense, right? Because I'm pretty privileged. I'm pretty middle of the line. But I think about how this plays out for people who are like autistic, for example, right? Like, say you're autistic and you get into a car and maybe you're like further down the spectrum and you just don't present in a way that someone's going to expect you to present. That social rating might not actually be fair to you at that point, right? Because it's based on how we feel, not actually like a fair assessment of you as a human being, right?
Right.
Or we also see like a ton of racism play out in Uber ratings as well, right? Like, what color you are when you get in that car can be kind of, it can impact how people rate you, which is super unfortunate. And so all of these tools that we've created with like the best of intention in mind, how we use them impacts actually the value that we get out of it, right? Now, like, I'm going to go Black Mirror on you guys for a second.
Uh-oh.
So even within Uber, social rating's a little tricky, but imagine now, like, I work in smart cities at Mars. We're working on connecting all of the data layers of a city in order to make it more efficient. And so at Mars, we talk about what would it mean to like connect Uber data to the transportation network, to like the public city of Toronto, governance, so that they could get line of sight into like all of these cars moving around the city, so that we can, better plan traffic lights and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
That makes so much sense. Right? Like, who doesn't want to have more effective traffic, right?
Right.
I hate being in traffic.
Me too.
But then the further you go down, those data sets in the public sector are oftentimes linked and connected to other data sets, right? And so what if the Department of Transportation also had a sharing agreement with the Department of Health, and suddenly your social rating, which started at Uber, is suddenly part of the health department? And then say you have, a terrible social rating in Uber, and you walk into a doctor one day and they're like, I'm sorry, we only serve people with ratings of 3 stars, 4 stars or above, or like, you're going to need to wait in line for 3 hours more because, your social rating just isn't as good as these other folks. And so there's so many ways that tools that we initially design, like this social rating in Uber, the longer it gets connected to different products and systems, they end up getting used in ways we never intended them to. And sometimes to a really detrimental outcome for some folks, right? And like, then think about the extreme case. Like, what about people who have no social rating, right? Like, there are folks that aren't on the digital layer, not very many, but they do exist. And so what would happen to folks, who just don't have any footprint at all? How are we catching them? And so this is like a thing that we think about all the time in anthropology. Anthropologists are obsessed with this concept of do no harm. So like, when we do work, we know that we're doing human work. And it's kind of a pledge like doctors take, right? Like, or like police take, serve and protect.
Right.
And so anthropologists are supposed to do no harm. So we're supposed to study people with the intention of not doing any harm to them. So we don't want to manipulate them. We want to protect marginalized folks. And that used to make so much sense when we were, in more traditional versions of the work we do. But now anthropologists are like designers, we're technologists, we're building systems, we're moving super fast, and we're doing way more than just anthropology. And so it's way more complicated. We're moving way faster, and we're going in and out of disciplines, which makes it really hard for us to know for sure if we're doing no harm. Right?
Yep.
It's just, how could you possibly measure it when you're moving as quickly as we are? So we ask ourselves this question instead. If you can't know for sure that you're doing a good thing, ask yourself, am I doing this because I can or because I should? And like, we encourage people to kind of do these little journaling activities to see how they come up, and to plan for unintended consequences as they go through. So there's a couple other like concepts we could talk about, but I don't know, does that resonate for you, Chris, as someone who comes in like business and design? And do you ever kind of have these struggles of whether or not you're sure if you're using the tools and the expertise that you have available to you, for good or for the opposite?
That's a deep question. My goodness. I have to admit, I'm not as thoughtful and intentional as you are. I try my best, but I'm so busy doing stuff that sometimes I don't take a moment to think about those unintended consequences as you speak about. I think I'm doing good, but when I try to do good and people say, "Hey, that's a dumb message. Why are you doing that?" It catches me off guard. Like, maybe I'm sending the wrong message, or maybe I didn't articulate that carefully. But where does my responsibility end and begin when I do something? Because some of this, if you take it to the extreme, would paralyze you from doing anything.
Absolutely. It's so true. Like, I consider myself a very woke person.
Well, they're saying, right? Yes, like, you are very woke for sure. They're saying it in the comments right now.
Thank you. But like, even I'm a terrible person, even though I'm woke. Right? Like,
wait, how are you a terrible person? Tell me how you're terrible right now. I challenge you.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So like, okay, so every day, like, one of my programs at Mars is all about sustainability, as trying to like reduce the carbon footprint in Canada as quickly as possible, because we have that like 10 years to mitigate climate crisis. Yeah. I wake up every day. I'm a super busy lady, and I'm lazy too. And so, I use like, to-go containers, like this guy and other stuff. Like every day, like I eat sushi for lunch every day, and it comes in a little plastic container. And every day I think, I do this every day. I literally do this every day. And I'm not like, I know I'm doing it and I'm not changing it,
Yeah.
But that's where I think it's so interesting. The role of design in this is that like, we know that people only do what is the easiest for them, right? And that's me included. Even though I have all this information, I only do what's easiest for me, right? And so the easiest thing for me to do is go buy whatever it is that's down in my cafeteria, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the power of design comes in, because what are we doing as designers, right? Like, we're designing those systems, we're designing those packaging, we're designing, we are decision makers, you know, like depending on who our clients are, whether you're working for yourself or you're working for Microsoft, like you're the person that's making the decision about what goes out into market, right? Because you're creating the thing. And so if we're designing, you know, more and more plastic containers, well, we're making that decision on behalf of like millions of other people. And we're also making that decision on behalf of ourselves. Like, now we have to eat what we made, which means like I'm doing that every day, right? So I don't really feel like a very good person. I do what's easiest for me every day. Every day I just do what's easiest for me. And then I try to have conversations like this to see if we can, you know, change what opportunities we have for consumers. But I actually don't think I'm a very woke decision maker in the way that I live my day-to-day life.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff to process here. My goodness. Okay, I have a bunch of questions for you, but are you done with the presentation part? And there's a bunch of comments already coming in and some debate going on right now as we speak.
Yeah, sure. There's like two other things
Okay,
that I was going
please.
to say,
Yeah,
which
let's.
is
Why don't we
just
do
like,
that first? Yeah.
for designers who are thinking about this, like, I just want to encourage you guys. There are folks out there in the world who have really come up with some cool tools for you guys. So like, go check out some Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking put together like 21 principles to guide AI,
Mm-hmm.
full of really interesting ideas. But I think there's like three things that designers can do. You can diversify our skills and our worldview, right? Like, in our field, we are always told to specialize, like get really, really good at that one thing, that one competitive advantage, because there's a million pieces of design, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you can rocket ship. But I kind of believe the opposite. I believe that like, if you want really big impacts, you need to learn how to speak many, many languages, right? And so if you diversify your skills and your worldviews, you're going to be able to access more and more people, you know?
Yeah.
And the second seems really difficult and easy at the same time, which is to always take this big picture approach. It's so hard as a designer, because like what we do is focus on the details. But if you can take a big picture approach as you're designing and just ask yourself internally where that small thing is going every day, and that takes us to the third one, which is just make decisions based on the long view of your design. So this is hard for us, you know. Our bosses want that like weekly conversions and engagement, and we have some real pressure to keep our jobs. But within, you know, your realm of influence, if you can, you know, make decisions based on what you think is good in the long term, that goes really far. It's almost like meditation. You never get it right. You can just try to do it every day. You know what I mean?
As one who doesn't meditate, I do not know what you mean, but I understand the concept.
One can only imagine.
We can imagine it. Okay, yes, I can imagine it. Okay. Woo. All right, there's a whole war going on here. You guys, let's keep the conversation focused on UX principles, and I think you're bringing a weightiness to the conversation. I have to admit, I'm on the shallow side of the pool here. You are on the Olympic end, so I need to tread carefully here. So I have to ask you a couple of questions about these unintended uses, and are they always bad? So you say, like, when we make something, like we invent fire, which helps us to be able to drink water, which ultimately establishes the foundation for societies and cultures to flourish. But fire, when used by an arson, can destroy forests, homes, and animals and life, and create carbon, CO2 gas, and all that kind of stuff. So how does one navigate this? A good friend of mine, Adam Kurtz, Adam JK, I hope I can call him a good friend. He has a talk, and he always does this. He goes up, he's like, this is a pencil, and in one hand, it's a tool, it's very powerful, you can express yourself, and the other, it's a weapon, and you can jab somebody, and you can literally kill them. So it's a tool for expression, it could be used as a weapon. But the person who invented the pencil, I don't think they were thinking like that. There's always people who have nefarious desires and goals and ambitions, and they will do bad things, and I don't know, can you design for that?
No, not entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Not entirely. No, I think that's totally fair. I think that there's a lot of different ways to cut it. So the first is that, like, I don't want everyone to feel like I'm telling them to only do the best thing every day. It's impossible.
Right.
right? Like it means that you can't accept work. It means that if you have such a strong ethical guard that you won't do literally anything that you think has potentially bad consequences, you won't do anything, right? Like we have to live in the gray zone. But there's different levels. I think what you have to do is you have to think to yourself, and this is a really personal question, like, what is my influence? What are my powers as an individual, right? And within that, how much leeway do I have to act, right? So, like, I think about it for me, like, I'm a woman in Canada and the US. I'm like a dual, so I go back and forth. I'm like well educated. I have a pretty good job, right? So for me, I consider myself like a pretty privileged person, right? Like I have a lot of, if I do something, I'm not going to get fired usually, right? Like I have a certain amount of permission space because of what I do and who I am. And not to say I didn't work hard for it, right? But like I have a certain level of permission space, which means that I feel like I have a bit more responsibility than some other folks do, right? Because like if I'm occupying that space, if I have the platform that I do, right, I don't really have a lot of negative consequences to me speaking up or, offering platforms or, asking those hard questions of the clients I have. Someone who's like significantly more junior than me in my company, I would never expect them to walk in like guns blazing, right? Because it's way too risky for that individual person, right? Like they're trying to feed their family or themselves or just like pay for rent in Toronto, right? Like people have some real needs, we have some real needs in the world. And so I never think it's a good thing to act beyond what is safe for you, right? Like personal safety first. Think about who you are and what you need and like what you're trying to do in the world and take care of yourself and take care of your family. But there's always some amount of opportunity inside of it, And so for like the pen, right? Like so I don't have an answer to that question. People are going to do crazy things. But when you think about like when we're designing products and that a certain type of design strategy leads to a certain type of addiction, or that a certain type of approach is going to lead down a certain pathway, I think it's fair to bring it up, right? And at least to raise the conversation. I think the first thing is just to open the conversation and have everyone talk about it.
Right.
And then you see where the opportunities are from there, right? But yeah, I totally get the restrictions of like personal needs inside of these difficult questions.
I wanted to ask you a quick question. How you said like you as a person who's more senior than say somebody who's just graduated from school, and you have a responsibility and you have a privilege that you can speak up and you could try ideas and not have the fear of losing your job that may or may not be founded. But do you find it in your life and experience that it's actually the opposite, where young people come in guns a-blazing, throwing out their ideas, wanting to change everything, and it's the more senior people are like, I got a nice pension, a golden parachute, I'm not going to F this up, and they wind up not saying anything? Because in my experience, that's 100%. How I feel, right? It's like the people who have the safety don't use it, and the people who have no safety are just running around the streets amok, setting things on fire.
Yeah, well, I love those young people. I try to hire them because I was one of those young people. Yeah. Like I'm not even that old.
You're not that old. Trust me, you're not that old.
And so like I feel like I play a dual role. Sometimes I'm the like old wise sage sitting in the room being like, okay, and then other times I'm the person blowing stuff up. But I think it's totally true. What happens is that, it's this weird psychological thing. The more you've invested in something, the more you don't want it to change. Like we know that, right? Yes. So like if you buy a house, like you have a mortgage, right? Like you're in, right? And so you don't want that market to change. You want that market to keep going the way it's going because you bought it. You bought your house with the assumption that like, the market's going to appreciate X amount percent and da 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 da. So if the market changes on you, no, because you made that investment, And people are the same way in their careers, we all like made sacrifices to get where we are. And so I think people who have made a lot of investment into themselves, it can be harder, to really be open to just kind of ripping stuff up, because it may require people who have, established themselves to go through that uncomfortable period again, right? That uncomfortable period of finding your pathway or not having everything kind of set and safe anymore, right? No, and no one likes change. It's super uncomfortable. It's super uncomfortable. Even good change is uncomfortable. So yeah, I think it's a personal choice for sure. For sure.
Okay. I want to talk to you about something because Jonah went, ooh, as soon as you said that, because he knows I have a different opinion about this, but I want to talk to you about this a little bit. You said that I know that a lot of people talk about specialization is the way. I'm one of those people. And you said really to make real big change, to kind of have that long view and to make the big impact that you're going to need to make, you need to diversify, that you need to speak many languages. So can we get into that a little bit? And I agree in some degrees that if you're in the management position, if you're the chief executive of something, you do need to be that person who speaks many languages and be able to connect many dots. I believe that's totally important. But if I'm just starting out, do you think that that's the best path for me to be very diverse in my pursuits?
I think there's two things. Yes and no. So I actually totally agree with you. You need to be able to go deep. I became successful in my career because I could go really deep in human factors, right? Like my specialization in anthropology was a really strong basis for me when I went into design to be a human factors specialist, right? And so, yeah, like I go deep in UX, I go deep in UI and human factors and user research and everything related to that kind of field. And sometimes I feel like a savant, right? Like I don't even pay attention to the news sometimes. I'm just reading books about that stuff because it makes me so passionate.
Yeah.
And it also is this safety place for me. I know that I can walk into a room and I'll have a certain level of expertise no matter what about those areas. And I'm going to like bring value, right? Like I'm not going to kind of stay at the surface level. However, I do think that if you go too deep for too long, you miss opportunities to stretch your impact or to even stretch your success, right? Because like my weird background actually plays for me in my career. So even though I'm that specialist, like if you look at my degrees, my first degree is in international studies, my second degree is in, global affairs. So I have a really broad education as well in business, economics, etc. And that type of knowledge helped me to become more successful faster. Because when I was in a room with the CEO or the chief client or someone who comes from the business strategy side of things, I wasn't kind of confined to just my specialty area. I could stretch what I knew inside of my area of expertise over to theirs and be this bridge across our two disciplines. And I think a lot about that because like some of the most incredible people in the world are transdisciplinary, like Einstein. Einstein was a transdisciplinarian. He was, all over the map. He did all the sciences and arts and stuff like that, right? And it's only by being that type of lateral thinker where you can take like deep expertise in one spot and then bridge it over and connect the dots to deep expertise in another, that you get like really cool ideas,
Right. I'm in agreement.
I don't know. Does that resonate for you?
It does. It does. And I think this is a more nuanced conversation. I just wanted to address that in case people are flipping out watching this later. Like, Chris, why didn't you say anything? Okay. I love this other thing that you were talking about is like, and it's very practical to talk about taking the long view, that there are internal pressures to perform in the near term, and that could cloud the decision-making of corporations and individuals. Can you give us some practical advice for somebody who is maybe not in such a big company like the one that you're in, where it's just one or two people, maybe even in a developing market? Like, how do they apply this long view thinking to what they're doing? Because at some point, people say this: we got to eat. I got to put a diaper on the baby and put food on the table and pay rent. How do we
100%.
help those people think about this? This would be wonderful if you could answer this and shed some light on it.
Yeah. So the first thing you can do is pick the right job, right? So if you're not in a position where you get to influence big systems, you can find a job that is, right? So for example, I could, choose to sign up for a job as a UX designer on, a social media company or something like that. And I would get a ton of really interesting experience and probably get a great career and stuff like that. Or I could take a job doing that same type of UX function, but say for like a clean technologies company or something like that, right?
Right.
And so our time is our most valuable resource. And I don't think we give enough credit to how much power we hold when we give someone our time, And so like your first thing that you can do as you're looking for jobs is think about like, who do I want to give my time to? And what are they doing? And like, what's their impact in the world, right? And am I trying to give them my time because I like that brand recognition and all of that stuff? No shame on you if you are. I have done my fair share of, brand-based work in my life. But then, when you're settling in the long term of your career, pick a job with a company that you believe in their mission. And ideally that company has a mission to try to make the world a better place in one way or the other. There's a lot of different ways that plays out. So I think that's the first thing is like who you choose to work for is huge. And if you have the privilege to get to choose, like take some time and think about what their mission is. In the second realm, where you're talking about like, just people in their everyday lives, making decisions, trying to take the long view, I think you need to be really strategic. You need to know when to have the conversation and when not to have the conversation, right? There's no one right answer to that. So I always use it as like a back of the mind kind of mindfulness activity. I know you're saying you don't meditate, but like I always have it in the back of my mind, like what brave conversation am I going to have today? Not so much that I'm stressing myself out, right? But like I try to make it playful, like what's one opportunity that I could have today to have some type of brave conversation about like what's happening in the long term with our work. And usually there's at least one opportunity in that day. And you just start small, like I remember the first time I was building a product for a really, really, really big company. And we were doing a bunch of like back-end data analytics around trying to understand people's preferences to push different types of options their way. And we got to this one point in the design where I got really uncomfortable because I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I feel like this is pushing the limit a little bit on like manipulating, people's experience or manipulating their purchasing choices or whatever. And I just raised it one day, as safely as possible just to see where the conversation could go. And the first time I had the conversation, it was like light. And then someone else brought the conversation back up the next time. But they felt empowered to bring that conversation up because I had started it, right? And so I think people like view these things as like, oh, like if you come in guns blazing, it's not good. And, you'll get fired from your job. And that's probably true. But you got to be stealth. Like you got to kind of be incremental with how you introduce, thoughtfulness into the design process so that it feels playful, right? Like we say that in UX all the time, like make it fun, make it delightful. Well, that's my goal is like, we can make doing the right thing delightful and fun too, right? Like we've kind of convinced ourselves that those two things don't exist, they don't coexist, but it should be totally fun to do the right thing. Why aren't we thinking about that more? I don't know.
I have to read a couple of comments here. We have I don't want to call him like a senior member, like he's old, but he has a lot of experience, and it's Bob. And Bob is saying, this part of creating brave spaces better than safe spaces, containers for conversations can be built to allow everybody to stretch what they want to bring to the conversation with empathy. Bob's dropping a lot of knowledge in here. He's like almost having this conversation with you, like, Bob, you should be here hosting this show. Maybe you and Ariel need to connect after this, but he's a very smart guy, a lot of empathy, great understanding. So I wanted to read that. Woo!
Thank you, Bob.
Yes, brave spaces. Okay, so we want to have...
This is a brave space right now. I feel like we're in a brave space right now.
I think so. I hope so. Let's express some of our bravery. What's one brave thing that we can talk about? And if I understand that, something like a brave conversation is something that may be controversial, that may be unpopular, that you might get some heat for. Is that what we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's one thing that you and I could talk about that would fit that description?
Well, it depends what level we want to talk about at. Do we want to keep it at the design level, or can we go up to like production and business strategy?
Wherever you want to take us, I'm in your hands.
All right. Well, I think something that's very unpopular. So, like, the most unpopular thing that a lot of people are working on right now is just trying to get us away from freemium products. I know that that's sacrilege. Like, it's super sacrilegious at this point. It's sacrilegious. Like, okay, so like, what world do we live in right now? We live in a world that is based on totally free products. You can have as many as you want, and the exchange is your personal information, right? That's a contract we've all signed, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to have as much access to as much information, as much streaming, as much content, anything I want, like the world on the platter. And the exchange is, I'm not going to pay any money, and you're going to collect my personal information when I use it. And you're going to transact with other companies on the back end. And that's how you're going to like sustain your product, right? A very unpopular alternative would be for us to move away from like free products, because there's this thing going on in the market where users are saying, you know, I want more control over my data. I want more privacy. I don't want everyone to be collecting data about me every 2 seconds. As we move into like smart connected cities, we're not just talking about consumer products anymore. We're talking about all the city architecture doing that for me too now. Like, holy cow, we've turned into this surveillance globe, right? And I feel uncomfortable now, right? Like, I feel compromised. Well, we can't have it both ways, really, right? Because like, you need a business model. You need a business model for a product. And if we're saying that we don't want to exchange in our data anymore, well, what's the alternative to that free products business model? Well, it's paying for things again, or some other alternative, right? Like driving value out of some other business model. But I think that's really contentious. Like, that's a very unpopular thing. Try to think about like pushing that to adoption, like no more free products. People would hate that, right?
I don't know. Let's talk about that. There's so many things here to talk about and unravel here. I want to prime our audience that are watching this live. If you guys have a question about some of the ideas that Ariel's brought up, I want to give you an opportunity. I will read your question. Try to phrase it very short so I can read it while I'm doing my bit. But before we give you that opportunity, I want to say this. So people are collecting our data, and generally people have a very strong opinion about that we don't like that. Am I weird? I actually freely give my data to people, because I want them to know me better. Like, I tell my wife, like, every time I go on a site and I like what they do, like on a retail shopping level, I sign up, because I want them to email me when something is happening. I want them to track what I'm shopping so that they can tailor the experience for me. When I put up the wall of no data, they just treat me like everybody else. And maybe I'm just being very naive here, Ariel, where I think, what harm is there to know it's Chris and this is kind of like what he likes? Unless I'm shopping for something really weird and it just gets out on the internet, like, whoo, I didn't know he was into that. Other than that, how does, I guess, like, am I being dumb here?
No, not at all. You're just, there's a million different perspectives and experiences of that in the world. So there's no one right answer. Like, I think it's great that that's how you feel,
Yeah.
and that's how you interact with products. It's just not everyone's truth.
Right.
Right. And so there's other truths, right? So there's other folks who go on and may have any number of personal reasons that they don't want their personal data to be collected, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for those people, but there's like any number of reasons why you don't want your personal data out there in the digital layer. And the problem we have is there's no alternative, right? So if you turn all those cookies off, what happens? You actually can't access things, right?
Oh, okay.
Like if you actually turn all those cookies off, if you say like, sorry, I don't want to do this.
Right.
There's no alternative, right? Like, there's no alternative that says, okay, great. Why don't you just pay us like $100 a year or, why don't you pay us $2 for this site visit, or $1 for the site visit, or whatever. Some
Right.
some sites
Or
have
should
that
read this
going,
article. Give us $1 for this article, or give us $5 to watch
right.
this video with Ariel. I'm just for example.
Hey, plug.
Right.
But and so like we don't, more often than not, when people don't want to do that, they just get blocked out of the system entirely, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's about not having it. I think it's about having alternatives for people. Like I don't think it's unfair for people to ask for an alternative, right? Like the world wasn't designed to be like a one model pay to play,
right.
a one way or the highway type of place, right? Like,
right.
I think that there's enough space in the world of design for us to create a bit more diversity. But then the other side is like, I love what you said about, you want people who you want to interact with to know you. Like, I relate to that. I totally get that. I feel the same way. But then where I get uncomfortable is, the 20 pages of terms and conditions on the other side, where I never read that. And so sometimes there's like all sorts of data sharing agreements in those terms and conditions that actually have your data going to people that you really don't want them to know.
That I have a problem with.
Right? So like,
yes, they sell your data.
And so,
yeah.
And so there, like, that's where the business model is on freemium. It's not just like collecting your data to maximize the purchasing journey. They're also selling that, right? Like they're selling it to all sorts of people that we don't know about. And as much as I want to believe that everyone has good intentions in the world, like they do not.
They do not. Clearly.
They do not.
Clearly they don't. I get that part. I'm bothered by that part. Okay. All right. Another quick question or follow-up on this is the idea of free. Like, I think, generally speaking, if you ask people, they do want stuff for free and they don't want to pay for things. But what you're saying is like, let's have a discussion about what you're actually paying when you're not paying with money. You're paying with data. You're giving up some privacy. You may be targeted for things that you don't want to be targeted for, or pieces of information revealed about you that you would rather keep private. So the example here, because I'm like, this is terrible. It's terrible. But then I'm like, what? Am I a hypocrite? We're on YouTube creating content for free. I'm not collecting data from you, but I'm sure YouTube is collecting something.
Sure.
So how do we reconcile that, where we think, and we like to use this very free and open platform to share knowledge? Like, you're a highly educated person with an incredible body of work and experience that somebody, because we have people from India, from Mexico, from all over the world watching and having access to you, this wonderful person sharing this information with us.
Hi, guys.
They're all there, hashtag woke. So how do we reconcile that? Is this free? And if you want to opt out of the advertising and the data collecting, I think there's an option, but you have to pay for that. I think it's called premium or YouTube Red or something, and then you could block all that stuff. But people would rather choose free. How do we find that balance?
I'm going to go like revolutionary.
Let's do it. I love it. Let's do it.
Let me put up a slide. Let me find it.
Right.
I don't know where it is.
Okay.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna
take a sec. Don't worry.
Right now.
I'm gonna say hello to Jamaica. You guys are watching. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. So we're like in an unfortunate place. We ended up where we didn't want to go. I'm saying that in the sense of like, you remember when the internet was first created, we thought it would just be like an online library, or
yes.
There was always the dark web, but the initial thought of the internet was much more this like open information sharing place, all the things that you just described, right? Like opportunity and amazingness. And what we did is over time, we converted it into this system that is actually very capitalistic, right? Like it's all based on transactions and data for money, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we talk about that, we actually have a really big effort in front of us, which is that we need to change the system. And that's huge. Like it's all of our powers combined if we want to live in that new version of the internet. So like this first wave that I have up on the screen, these are two waves, and like the first wave is what you call a dominant system, and what that means is like everything that's happening now. So like everything that the internet is right now, that's like the dominant system, is that first wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people, there's like four types of innovators, and the two types, like the first one is a protector, and that person, they're trying to like innovate so well that they keep the internet working exactly the same way as it is happening right now, you know, because like they're winning the business competition as it currently exists, you know. And so those folks are putting as much effort as possible into making sure that we keep the like data transaction internet economy alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of folks say, you know, okay, I'm not comfortable with that anymore. And they jump off and they try to build a new system. And we call those folks trailblazers, right? And you see some people doing that now. They're really brave. They're challenging the status quo. They're kind of like the Greta Thunbergs of the world, but instead of on environmental issues, on, you know, data and access and privacy. And they're saying, you know, I want a new type of internet. I want a new type of digital layer that I interact with. And they're building their own companies. They're building their own layers. Like folks in the EU have, you know, developed more stringent privacy policies that are pushing them into a new system of the internet. And in between that, you have these two other types of entrepreneurs. The second are like, we call them hospice workers. They're people who like, they keep innovating on the system, even as it's dying. And then the people in the middle, they're called illuminators. I consider myself a bit of an illuminator. You're just standing out in the middle saying, hey guys, I think this is what's coming ahead, right? And what's so cool about these illuminators is that they can actually advance or like accelerate us moving into that new system more quickly. And so like for all of the folks that are on the line watching, and like you, Chris, like I think we might all identify as like being different players, right? Like some folks on the line might see themselves as a trailblazer, like coming up with a new idea and taking that big risk and putting it into the market and seeing how it works. And other folks are like protecting the system, you know, they're just innovating and trying to make it better. Some folks are somewhere in between.
Let's stay on this slide for a second. Can we stay on this slide? Because I want to cue our audience up here. Ariel, first I want to ask you, are there other categories? What if you don't recognize yourself in these four dots?
Oh, I don't know. You tell me.
Oh, I think there must be. Okay, so yes, this is what I want to do. Everybody's watching this, right? Everybody's watching this. Take a minute to reflect. Are you a protector? Are you a hospice worker, meaning you're just maintaining the system, keeping it alive even though it's dead? Are you an illuminator, kind of shining the spotlight on things and saying, hey, there's other things that are interesting out here? Maybe not taking a stake in anything, but just saying there's interesting things. Or do you say, like, F this system, I'm out of here, I'm going to do something different, and you just create your own branch? Do you consider yourself a trailblazer? So go ahead and comment down below. Let us know what you think. And then I'm also curious, how do you see us, the future? Do you see us as protectors? Are we keeping the system alive, the hospice worker? Are we shining the light? Or are we just blazing a new trail? I'd love to hear your opinions and your thoughts on that, and just maybe a sentence or two about why you think that is. I'm curious because I have my own identity, but I'm just not sure. I'm not sure what you think. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So
I love this activity.
I mean, this would be really great to kind of just do in a workshop format, and also maybe identify other dots. You know, it's a more nuanced world than four types, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, I want to read this one comment. I love this comment. It's from Woke Gentleman. He says, Ariel is maybe too smart for Chris, and Ariel, I freaking hate it, but I agree.
That's not true at all.
She has 2 degrees. She's well educated in many different things. I barely got 1 degree. Almost didn't make it out of graphic design school. I just want to let you know. So I know how to make things look good.
Well, come on though. But that's why you're a trailblazer, Chris. Whoa! Oh my God, I can't even talk. See, that's why I'm not smarter than you.
Or maybe you slur your words when you're lying. Who knows? That's a tell. You're a trailblazer.
No, because you set up your own institute. Like, it's incredible what you've built, you know, and you had to take that risk. Like, that's why I think you're a trailblazer. I kind of sat into all of the structures I was supposed to walk through. I feel guilty about it sometimes. I think some of the most interesting, accomplished people are folks who built it on their own, you know? Like, my parents were entrepreneurs. And so I watched them. I grew up in a house of entrepreneurs. And so I never had the appetite for it. I never had the appetite for the risk associated with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no hate on that. That's a bold, courageous road to walk.
Well, Woke Gentleman says the future is a hospice worker. Okay, so
That's a hate.
we have different opinions. That's okay. Maybe it's just a lot of love for you. I don't know. Sometimes to hold one up on a pedestal, one has to push somebody else down. I don't believe that, but some people do feel that's true. We're gonna take a little heat today.
Bad name over here.
Well, happy Thursday to you too, Woke Gentleman. All right. Wow. Okay. I lost where we're at, but we're just having fun with you right now. Okay. Woo. All right. What else are we talking about? I'm not. I think you're too. You're like too smart. People are like, there's when our guest is either very clear or too smart. Everybody's like, well, I don't know what to talk about. So I think we're in both those categories right now. Okay. I hear there's a funny comment. Luis is saying, I'm a bike climber on the curve questioning what's on the top of the hill. Okay, I don't see. Hey, Bob, why don't you ask us a question? Because I'm sure, Bob, you're going to ask a really good question, and I'll read that. And we'll give you a second, Bob, to formulate something here.
I see the future as an illuminator.
Why do you say that?
I think your guys' role in the market is like, it's a really special thing to bring voices up and create platforms for them, It's not everyone that can do that. And it's only people who can curate really cool ideas that are just on the realm of like now and the future.
Yes.
That drive as much followership as someone like you, I think you guys are squarely inside the illuminator position. How do you guys see yourself? How do you see the future?
Did you just change your answer? I thought you just called me a trailblazer. Now you put me in the illuminator category. Next thing I know, I'm a hospice worker. It's evolving, you guys. We're an evolving show. Actually, I think you're right, honestly, because I think in a way we're trailblazing because we're trying to break away from the education model in the system. We're using open free platforms. We're using some tech in ways that maybe the original creators didn't intend it to be used. We use an incredible amount of technology here to try to teach in a very kind of old-fashioned idea and using very new tools and methods in that sense. But you're right. I think in the sense of we're illuminating things, like we're having people like you on the show who bring a totally different perspective and an area of expertise that people just don't get access to. So I think we straddle those two worlds. Our business model, I think, is a little bit more trailblazing, but literally what we're doing is shining the light. So I think you got it.
See, you as Chris Doe are a trailblazer. You as the future are an illuminator.
Okay. Hey, I love it. Okay, so let's see. Where's Bob's question? Here we go. He's got a question. How can we translate this idea of long effects directly in usability or the user experience? How do we make it part of design strategy? There you go. Bob.
Yo, that's big.
It is.
That's big. So I used to work at Deloitte, and when I was working at Deloitte, I got invited to set up a biometrics usability lab. What does that mean? That's like a lot of words. So biometrics usability means like your screen tracks your face to see if you're happy, sad, frustrated. So you have facial recognition, right? That's kind of showing your like emotions on the screen. And then that gets cross-referenced with what you call pupillometry. It's like how dilated your pupils are. And that tells you how hard you're thinking, which is crazy to think about. Mm-hmm. The way that we're able to like measure human beings is insane. And then the last piece is eye tracking. So like where you're looking on the screen, right? So those three things together, where I'm looking on the screen, how I feel emotionally, and how hard I'm thinking. Those three things tell us a lot about how you're interacting with an interface, right? And so when we were setting that up, like that's a fascinating way to approach taking the long view in usability and UX strategy, because the way that you measure those three things will tell you why you are doing what you do, right? So I like jumped on this opportunity to build this lab because I was like, I love this stuff. It's going to be so fun. And as we got further and further down, I realized that it wasn't like who had those tools in their hands completely completely changed the trajectory of the work we were going to do, right? So like use case number one, UX strategy is to just improve conversions on your website or to drive people towards a certain purchasing pathway. That led to a lot of neuromarketing, right? And so like the biometrics usability lab fed a ton of neuromarketing. And neuromarketing is essentially like where a platform is like actively reacting to your reactions on the screen
Wow.
and changing the options in front of you, right? For me, I have like very strong ethical issues with neuromarketing because it's super manipulative. Because depending on your like emotional state or whatever, right, like a platform can actually really influence you and manipulate you. And so that I think is a really good example of like taking the long view in UX strategy, because we have all of these really powerful measurements that we use sometimes live on a platform. And it all comes down to like, what are you planning to use that information for? Right. So like if you want to use that information to just optimize purchasing and you're taking the long view, you might not do that, right? Because you might be thinking about the long view of manipulation and addiction and things like that, and it might defer you from doing it. The alternative of that UX strategy is you can use those same exact measurements to actually encourage people to do something that's good for them every day. So you could be tracking people's, pupils and face and eye tracking, and you could notice when they're like stuck in a loop on their platform. And you could include a little notification that says like, hey, why don't you go take a walk? Or like, hey, have you drunk any water recently? Or, hey, like, remember your mom? Why don't you give her a call? Or any number of little things like that that kind of nudge people towards things that we know are good for them, good for their health, good for their emotional and mental health. So I think that there's like a million ways, and it always goes back when you're doing your UX strategy, taking the long view. Why are you doing this? Like, what are you hoping to accomplish? And hopefully the answer is do something good for people and the planet.
Jonah, stay on the shot for a second. I want to tell our audience that on the screen, there's one idiot. I'll let you figure out which one of the two of us is the idiot right now. Okay. I want to talk about this a little bit. Use this word manipulation. So I have some questions about this, where in both instances, I believe you are manipulating the user based on understanding their biofeedback. In both cases, and where we might say one feels very dirty, where the other one feels like it's helpful, but we still, the machine can do more if it understands you better, like how human beings are. For example, you and I are talking for this situation here. If I notice all of a sudden you recoiled or you gave me a weird look, like your eyebrows furrowed together, I then realized I said something that might have offended you or somehow has pushed you away, and then I adjust. And I would not call that manipulation. I would just call that being human. The opposite would be much worse, which is like, regardless of what you do or say, I keep plodding forward. I make no adjustments. And that would be horrible. Mm-hmm. So if the machine can do this for us, I think whoever's programming the machine probably should try not to push somebody who's trying to stay sober ads for liquor. That would be horrible, right? Yes, but like if all of a sudden I read a tweet and it's bothering me and it can tell that I'm bothered by it, maybe it can just, like in the science fiction film Her, it just can say, hey, why don't we look at some pictures from your childhood? Tell me a story about how you won that championship again, and just to help you manage your emotions. The other question I have is, how easy are we manipulated? Is it that easy? Do we take personal responsibility? And at what point do we say we're going to abscond from our responsibility and saying like, oh yeah, I'm just a person moving through the world and I could be pushed in any direction? Back to you, Professor.
Yeah. Well, such good questions. I love the example that you gave. I think that you hit the money on the head. I have like two feelings about it. Number one is we are very influenceable. So only 10% of our thoughts are conscious thoughts. Whoa. That means that 90% of our thoughts are all subconscious.
Jonah's mind is blown right now. He's like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
Jonah, give me a full 10% today, will you?
I'll try.
Okay.
Yeah, 10%.
Yeah. Okay.
10% of our thoughts that, lead to our actions are conscious, which means we're only, depending on how you look at it, this is kind of this is a weird way to put it, but in some senses, you're 10% in control.
Yes.
Which is not a lot, right? And so I think that we underplay how much influence the digital layer has on us, right? Yes. Like you can, let's like throw all the computers and digital layer away. Let's just go like pretend it's a physical only environment, right?
Yeah.
Like this happens just in the real world, right? Like say you're in a busy street filled with smog, and like you're disoriented. That's mostly subconscious. Like you're only 10% consciously aware of what's going on with you, versus if you're like in the forest, you have a beautiful sunset, you're in like a positive mentality. It encourages you to, be in this like the best version of yourself, type of mind space.
Yeah.
And those two environments change how you can show up. They change your decision making. They change how clearly you think. They change whether or not you're like making decisions based on fear versus opportunity, right?
Yes.
And we have all sorts of things in our environments every day that are subconsciously either improving our like outcomes and our thought patterns or making them not great. It's something I struggle with all the time in Toronto. Like I grew up in the West, in the desert, with lots of open space, lots of sun. And so in Toronto, subconsciously, my body is really disoriented. Just all the noise and the cold and the craziness of the city, right? And so I'm constantly having to consciously put myself back on track, make sure that I'm in like the best version of myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you add the digital layer on, it's doing it on purpose, Chris, right? Like we've designed stuff to manipulate on purpose. Like it's not accidental, right? Like the industry hired in folks who come from all sorts of these psychological backgrounds to be able to better understand nudging, behavioral economics, all of that stuff. And at this point, it's just become core to the like background infrastructure of how it all works, So us as individuals, I have a lot of pity on us as individuals because we're just doing the best we can. But us as owners of like infrastructure that has certain types of decisions that lay in the backbone, I don't give us a lot of leeway on that. Like we should know what our architecture is,
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. I'm going to see if there's one more question from you guys. This is a really deep conversation, and I'm not saying this facetiously. It is probably one of the deepest conversations I've had on this show ever. Whew. I don't know how to process. I'm going to have to watch this 10 times to kind of fully absorb the things that you're saying. No, I love it. And I'm glad that sometimes we can goof around and talk about typefaces and if that logo sucks or not. And then we can get into this deep thing about responsibility, manipulation, design for good. There's a lot of stuff here. Okay, I'll take one more question before we wrap up. And probably, maybe, if you guys are really enjoying this content, I'm going to suggest that you hit that like button right now. Give us a comment. I will read the comments and we'll see. Maybe we can invite Ariel back for a follow-up to this where now, at least now you guys know who she is and the kind of big ideas that she's dropping on us, that we can have a more informed conversation. And maybe on that second one, I'll just get out of the way and you guys could just ask the questions. Okay.
Chris and I can, I think that we should commit to doing a rap battle in a future episode.
Okay. I suspect you're tipping the table towards you because are you wearing a Run DMC shirt?
No, it's Jay Dilla.
Oh, okay. Okay. I feel like you may have a leg up on me on that already. Okay. Who else has a question for us? Boy, people are like mind blown. This is deep, bro, with a lot of O's on that one. I don't know what else. There, no, I don't want to read those comments. Guys, keep it focused on the UX conversation that we're having right now. Again, there's some funny conversations going on the side. I don't know. Maybe they're just speechless right now.
That's all right.
Bob is saying, hell yeah. We probably, I hope that is like, let's have another conversation, I think. All right. We're going to end it on this one. This is a very broad question, so I'll let you answer this however you see fit. Mark Spector is asking, how can you learn UX design the right way?
You got to do it a million times. I don't believe you ever skip steps. The only way you get good at anything in life is doing it a million times. If you want to be a great dancer, do a dance a million times and eventually you get it right. So I do think education and mentorship is key. Like find a place that has a program or some type of methodology that you want to learn, people who are willing to invest in you. But like advice from someone who was trained outside of their formal education, you just do it a million times. And then you find people who want to invest in you. Like I've been really lucky that I've had like sponsors and mentors throughout my career who kind of took a chance on me. You know, they said, you might not, come from the backgrounds we expected you to, but I think you have something here. And then they were willing to like watch me fail a bunch of times before I got it right. So I think that's it. Like you need to find people you respect and then be ready to roll your sleeves up and just repeat the process as many times until you get it right. I don't know. Does that make sense for you, Chris? How would you answer that question?
I can't answer that question because you're talking about some pretty deep stuff here. I think maybe give him like just one step. What's the first step he needs to do? Like there are a lot of people who want to get into UX design. Is there a book, a podcast, or a video, a movie, a one class that you can say just start there and that'll start to open the path for you?
Well, I would go on the D.School website. So Stanford, the design school of Stanford, they have a bunch of amazing free tools. The D School is their design school. And I would click straight into that website and start browsing around on their content. The first thing you want to learn is just the 5-step design process: frame, discover, analyze, ideate, test. And then from there within UX, to be able to start working through architecture and template development. Those are your first 2 steps for sure. But go to the D School website. It's full of really cool programs and content that can get you started.
That was perfect. Well done. And you did this so succinctly. I think we have to have one more question for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So Bob's back. Everybody's telling me to ask Bob's question, so I must do the will of the audience here, the will of the people. Is there a common language we can use that works both environmentally and digitally or via other means of communications? What is the tabula rasa of connecting humans the most honestly? I didn't even understand his question, so here you go.
Yo, you gotta feed that to me one more time.
Yes. Okay. Is there a common language we can use that works both environmentally and digitally or some other means? What is the tabula rasa of connecting humans the most honestly?
Wow, that's deep. Yo, you just went up to me, Bob, on the deep chapter.
Bob, how dare you? How dare you try to do that to our guests here? Answer it any which way you want.
I would say, so like the first thing that comes to mind is experience, right? Like the word experience, I think, is the thing that binds all things together. Why is that, right? You have an experience when you talk to your mom. You have an experience when you get on your phone. You have their experience is universal, right? And it's about what experience you're having. Are you having a digital experience, an environmental experience? And so if we start from there, I think that's number one. But the downfall of that is that it's like super human centered. Like in some senses, I kind of retired out of human-centered design. I'm still a human-centered designer because you have to be, right? But I realized that like us always designing for people is why the planet's dying, right? Because like the things that are really good and convenient for people are actually why we have such a huge carbon footprint, right? Like everything that's super easy has a huge carbon footprint.
Yeah.
right? And so we talk a lot about this in human-centered design, that like it's actually really, we did a bad thing because we didn't actually give any props to how important the planet was, right? Like our environmental resources, and the fact that we're kind of running out of them at this point. And so that's something I'm trying to figure out now, is like, how do we bridge everything we know from like digital user experience, etc.? How do we start to privilege like the experience of the planet, right? And so there's a lot of systems designers that are up in the space now that are they're trying to like re-educate designers like myself on, biodiversity and plant science, and almost take us back to like the 101 of what it means to live on planet Earth. And they're trying to educate us on those things with the question of like, how can we combine forces, right? Like, how can we combine environmental knowledge with consumer science knowledge, so that we can redirect ourselves back? So I don't actually have a good answer to that question.
I like your answer regardless. I like your answer regardless. I don't know if I fully understood the question myself. So if you were able to answer it, that would have been a miracle. But I do want to say something here. When you said that you kind of retired from human-centered design, I was like, what? What do you mean? And then you said, like, maybe that's been a part of the problem, is that making the focus on what humans need, that we're destroying the planet. I have this other kind of view on this thing, that we're not really destroying the planet. We're destroying ourselves. The planet will be here long after we're all extinct, doing the things that we're doing. So true human-centered design takes the long view, not the short view, in creating disposable things, right? So maybe you're like a true human-centered designer, because we need to live in a sustainable way in harmony with the environment, such that many, many generations, 10,000 generations later, we're all still here and we're making improvements. Because I think what we're doing ultimately is we're taking a very narrow view, a short-sighted view, and we are going to do this to ourselves. The planet will heal. We may not be able to recover, and we're kind of fast approaching some of these concepts that are very alarming to me.
This is why you have a show and I don't. Smartest person in the room over there.
No.
I got to point the other way.
Okay, this is a beautiful moment. We're going to end it on this before I blow it and say something totally stupid. Guys, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And usually at this part of the show, I usually will do a summary. I cannot do a summary here. So, Ariel, thank you for coming on the show. I would love to have you back. And this time I'll try to have smarter people to have a conversation with you. Maybe Bob will join us. If you guys want to reach out.
I love you guys so much.
And you want to follow. Thank you
me.
very much. Thank you. If you guys want to follow Ariel, I highly recommend that. She's on Instagram at Ariel Jane. And if you guys want to check out the company that she works at, it's marsdd.com. Did I get that part right?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Okay, guys, I'm going to take us out with some music. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Just sending you guys lots of love. We have one more show before the year winds up with Elizabeth Carey Smith. I hope you guys tune in for that. Thank you. Donation, you guys know who you are. Sustaining members, love you guys. Have a great holiday. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.